It's Rocky. We don't have much time. I double record everything just in case. So, but get the voice working. Come on, Vanessa. You can do it.
That's
There we
right.
go.
Everybody
Ooh.
do everybody do your vocal glides and
Yeah.
your hum glides. Do all that stuff.
All right. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Transcending Humanity. This is episode uh, 35 now.
I thought we were on 33. Are we on 34, 35? Man, I don't know.
I'm Googling this shit. Right here, transcendinghumanity.com. And I'm leaving this in episodes. This is episode 34. Wow.
Cool.
Who would have thought? So, welcome to episode 34 of Transcending Humanity. Today, we are joined by a couple guests from across the pond in the UK. The UK, if you've been following the news, both the UK and the US seem to be going head to head on who can be the most horrible to the trans community. And they are here to talk about that, amongst other stuff. Erica has a series of questions lined up for them. So I'm going to hand things off to Erica so she can get that started, and then we can get introductions on our guests. So, Erica, go for it.
Yeah. Before I get rolling, shout out to Florida. Fuck you. After what you guys did yesterday. Was it
And
yesterday,
Utah.
Vanessa? And Utah.
Yeah.
Anyways, sorry. All right. So I am pleased to introduce you all to Jenni and Christi, who are joining us from across the pond in the UK. I met them on a Discord that I was invited to maybe 6 months ago. I don't know. They're great. And we got talking about having them on an episode. So they're here to talk about what life is like in the UK as a trans person. Jenni, would you like to introduce yourself?
I'm Jenni. I'm 50 nearly, which fills me with horror. But it's unavoidable. So I'm a trans woman, she, her. I transitioned really late in life. In the UK, I live up in the north of England, and actually where I am is quite isolated. And I think that's something that impacts quite a few of us in different ways. So that server that you were talking about and that chance to link up with folk, that's been, completely life-changing for me, which is where I met Christi and yourself, obviously, and then just started to form some of those relationships is completely life-changing.
Fantastic. Yes, I love having gotten to know you over the last, I think, 2 months, maybe. I
Yeah.
generally love your point of view on almost everything trans. So,
Oh,
Christi, how about you?
So I'm Christi. I'm 34. I'm from the UK. I live just outside Manchester. I'm from Manchester, UK originally. I'm currently in my very dimly lit car. Hopefully the rain isn't too loud. It's raining obviously because it's Manchester and it always rains. I just haven't managed to make it home yet. I've been out as bi since about 2011 thereabouts, and then I've been out publicly out as trans and in transition for about 17 months, and on hormones for about a year.
Oh, we'd love to hear that. So, shout out to people transitioning late in life. I'm 52. I came out at 50, right? I think I'm not going to talk about Vanessa's age. That's up to her.
I'm 42. I came out when I was 40.
42. And even in the 30s, like, just before we jump into questions, I want to touch on something that sort of is in the air here. We have, trans women from different ages, and there's this narrative out there that, oh, it's too late if you're not a teenager or you're past 20 or 21. Screw that noise. That is not true. You can come out whenever you feel like it's right, whether it's you're 14, 24, 35, 45, 60, 70, 80. Like when the time is right for you, the time is right. So I just want to always love to make that point. Anybody who's telling you it's too late, fuck those people.
Including yourself,
That's
Yes.
right.
Fuck yourself.
especially yourself. When I was
that's
22, I
so
thought I was
true.
too old and it was stupid. I was such an idiot.
There's
Yeah.
that voice in your head. I had it for
Mhm.
years. And it's
Yeah.
like, because I have children, I have a grandchild, and like you, I work in education, and you just think, no, there's no way this is a possible path for me. It is, it can happen, and it does happen. And the fear of it is
Yeah.
ridiculous, because actually the reality of it in the end, once you decide to walk that path, I think is joyful. I wish that I'd have told myself that years ago.
Same.
Yeah, I mean, and same, right, Jenny? I mean, the time is the time when it happens, and we all have this voice in our heads telling us, questioning, gaslighting ourselves effectively into, all right, trans, am I not trans? And is it the right time? Do I feel secure enough? Whatever the rationale. Like I'm a trans grandma too, right? And you struggle with that voice inside your head, but you also hear it so much from outside, especially from let's just say those that are the haves in the trans community that happen to be young and beautiful, that put this shit out there.
Yeah.
Okay.
I remember just this would have been about 2 weeks, I reckon, after I came out, and my grandchild's mum, who is very young herself, my kids have had their grandchildren, my grandchildren are quite young. She has a little sister, and her sister's called Nell, and she's 4 years old. And Nell saw me for the first time after transition, and she came up to me and she just went, "Are you a girl now?" And I went, "Yeah, I am, love. I'm a girl." And she said, "But you used to be a boy, didn't you?" And I said, "Yeah, I used to be a boy, but I'm a girl now." And she said, "Oh, that's great. I've always just been a girl," and then went off playing. And there was nothing about it that was difficult at all for her.
I know, right? It's crazy. Yeah, I mean, kids are always universally great about this. I know we're avoiding the questions I had to ask, but I'm going to just dial in on this for a second. One of the things that we hear out there in the community is like, "Oh, well, how do I explain you to my kids?" You don't have to explain us to our kids. They get it, right? They get it. I've had that same experience as you, Jenny, many, many times. And like, kids don't have a problem with it. It is the adults in their lives that teach them to have a problem with it. Okay, so now let's actually dive into our officially sanctioned questions. So what I would love to know, I think the purpose of this show is not only to introduce 2 new friends of the podcast, but our first guests from the UK. So I really want to sort of juxtapose the differences between the US. Oh, hold on. Go ahead.
We've had one from the UK before.
Okay. I might have missed
Oh, you don't need us then. I'll just disconnect.
Yeah.
It's fine.
So
it's fine. It's fine. Well, we need more.
Shay Barnes.
Obviously.
Shay Barnes.
Oh, right. Okay.
I just had to interject that, but
okay. Well, now you've thrown me off. Anyways,
I know. Sorry.
Back on.
Vanessa.
So to continue to tease out some of the differences between life as trans in the UK versus the US, we have on even more guests from the UK. So, what would you like to relate to us? What are those early days like? Vanessa and I have sort of talked about, I think that ad nauseum, people are probably tired of hearing about that from us, but I would love your perspective on what's that kind of coming out process in the early days of transition in the UK.
Do you want to go first, Jenny?
Yeah, sure. Well, I was 47. I was very late. Obviously, you have all those thoughts. And I think for us growing up in the 70s and in the 80s, there kind of wasn't much of a word for it. And there certainly wasn't much in the way of representation. The idea of being trans meant all kinds of other things, which were often ridiculed, generally not nice. And I was brought up in, quite an evangelical Christian family. And there were particular, so there were particular things with that meant it was very, very difficult either to consider your gender, but also to consider your sexuality.
Right.
So it took me a long, long time. But that first moment, the reactions that really struck me were the reactions of my wife, and we're not together now, but we're extremely good friends. But she just looked at me and she just went, "Oh, yeah, that figures. That was it." My kids, absolutely fine. And in fact, a few months ago, my eldest came to me and said, "You won't detransition, will you?" And I said, "Well, no, of course not. Why would I do that?" And he said, "Well, because our relationship is now so much better." And I think there's something about just being aligned. So yeah, for me, there were so many things relationship-wise that just started to slot into place. And I think the other thing I'd say from those early days is that I couldn't have predicted where it would be. And I remember my best friend saying to me, "Where do you think this goes?" And I said, "Well, I know that I'm non-binary and I might be non-binary transfeminine, but I don't know much more than that yet." And then very, very quickly, as the dominoes fall, all those sorts of things begin to slot into place. So that's how it felt for me. It felt like I was on a path, and it took me where it needed to take me.
I love that take. I mean that sort of resonates with, I think, a lot of us here in the US and on the show. You know, I came up in a relatively religious household as an early child and sort of transitioned out of that. But I still had all that messaging in my head, and I grew up in the deep South of the United States, where it's a very religious part of the country, and also had some very similar experiences with my kids who were like, "Oh, our relationship is so much better." So yeah, I mean that kind of feels quite universal. Jenny, what about you, Christy?
Um, it's a complicated question, really. What was it like in the early days of coming out? Because I kind of feel like it depends where you measure from. Because I've
Mm-hmm.
had a lot of it's kind of been. I feel like I'm coming out all the time.
Yeah.
It's like
Yes.
a constant thing that's not. There wasn't any one moment where I came out and then that was it. Like it's this perpetual process of like having to validate yourself to people and having to kind of um, push to say, no, this is actually who I am, and reaffirm yourself constantly in the eyes of others. And I actually came out to a GP when I was 18, but
Mm-hmm.
I went to a GP and I said, hey, because I'd had these feelings for a long time when I was very little. I'd had negative experiences. You know, I'd styled my hair in a particularly feminine way. And I remember my dad saying, change it, you look like a girl. And those kind of like negative, kind of the negative association with the idea of looking like a girl kind of set in quite early. So I went to a GP when I was about 18, said, hey, I think I might be trans actually.
Mm-hmm.
And they said, well, we actually think you're just depressed. So we're going to give you antidepressants and that'll solve the problem. Come back in 6 months if you still feel the same. So I came back in 6 months. I said, I still kind of feel the same. Oh, we'll up your dosage of antidepressants because that'll fix it. That'll make it better. So it was like this constant battle of having to fight your way through. So inevitably, it didn't go away because it doesn't. And when I was 29, I went back to a GP, but this time I'd spoken to other trans people. I understood the process. I knew what I needed to do. I went with like the NHS guidance for trans care, printed out the form that they needed to fill in, printed out. I filled in the bit I need to fill in. And I took it. I said, I want you to refer me to a gender identity clinic, please. And they said, oh, you need a diagnosis. I said, no, I don't. That is not the guidance as of 2004. Here is the NHS guidance printed off for your convenience. I have filled in the form that you need to send off. You can fill in the rest of it and then send it. And they were like, oh, okay. And they did. So they sent it and it all kind of got dealt with. And in the background of that, there's like the social coming out. So telling my parents, telling my partner, telling friends. And I still feel like I'm still in the middle of it. It feels like it's still ongoing. And it can be quite hard. It's a great feeling. And when I'm in like accepting spaces and I'm in spaces with the trans people and I'm in a community where I'm just gendered correctly and I don't have to validate myself and I'm just taken as I am, it's fantastic. It's the best feeling in the world. I feel complete in a way that I never felt before. And it feels like, oh, I'm actually feel present. I don't feel disconnected from everything. I don't feel like a passenger in my own life.
Yeah.
And that's amazing. So yeah, it's just this. It is a process, and I can't point to a single moment of that was when I came out and that was it. Really
Makes sense.
I love that analogy of feeling like a passenger in your own life. I mean, I think that describes it really well for me, and I'm sure quite a few other people just sort of feel like life was happening to me, and I'm just going from trauma to trauma, trying to work my way through it. And and
not really understanding why things weren't working either, because things weren't working. And I was just like, why can't I make this work? And it's just because I didn't really feel present in those moments. I didn't feel like I was making those choices. I feel like they were being made for me because that's what was expected.
Mhm. I love the piece that you talked about your second trip in to get the referral that you needed, like the self advocacy, educating yourself, knowing what you need to do, having that form ready to go, and correcting them on the guidance. I think that's a really powerful message. At least here, I assume also there as well, right? I can't tell you the amount of times with my GP, and even I have a new doctor for my transmedical care, and she's better than the one I had before. And I cannot tell you the amount of times I would have to correct his information to him, whereas the new one, she's like, "Oh yeah, no, we do it this way, and like these are the reasons." And I think if you are going to pursue medical transit, and frankly, any aspect of transition, you have to really inculcate that sense of agency you have in yourself. This is not an easy
Yeah,
process. It's very obfuscated. You have to pursue it, and you, more often than not, have to know more than the people you're talking to.
absolutely. And it's very frustrating because um, here, I mean, in the US, in different parts of the US, I'm sure it's similar and it may be different in other areas. But here, essentially, gender healthcare is devolved from the core NHS with the intention of it being experts that deal with gender related care. But the problem is, it's gatekept by people who have no training and no expertise and
Yeah.
no understanding of gender based care. And I'm often having to explain to them what should be happening, what they should be doing, what the next steps are. It's much better now because I'm under the care of a gender identity clinic. So my prescriptions and my care is completely handled by them. They are experts and they do know what they're doing. But that initial hurdle is really daunting. And especially when you're younger, I know when I first approached a GP and I was kind of in my, late teens, early 20s,
Right.
you have a degree of trust in your doctor that what they're telling you is true. And the reality is that they're not doing it intentionally to undermine you, but they don't know what they should be doing. And if you
Right.
have that blind faith in them, you might not get the care that you need. So you have to go in kind of with your eyes open, which is quite hard actually.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And since we're here, my next question is really about NHS. Like, how does the system work there? But before we dive in, I think in the US, it depends on where you live. Each state within the country sets their own. We have guidance that's across the whole country that they can choose to follow to varying degrees. Where I live in the DC metro area, it is an informed consent state, right?
Same
So
with
that
me.
means, yeah, okay. So I wasn't sure if that was true for you, Vanessa. So that means I can go to my GP and I don't need a referral. I can go see a gender therapist who specializes in that, and I don't need a referral. And I can say I would like to start, feminizing HRT as a trans woman, and they're like, okay, right? You don't need the permission in some states, but in other states it is very gate kept. Vanessa, do you know of any other places that are like much more rigorous about that here in the States?
I don't personally know, but I mean, I'm sure Florida is.
Oh, yeah. Well, it's very typical. Any place where there's a care ban, right?
Yeah.
So for us, it can be you get that referral from probably a psychiatrist, psychologist level, mental health practitioner. Maybe you can get that from your GP. If you live in a state where it's informed consent, you basically just sign paperwork. What's the process like there? And is it a very universal process, or does it depend on the region that you're in?
So it's a very universal process, but it's not applied consistently. And as I said, it's
Mm.
devolved. So Jenny can probably explain more about the kind of informed consent model related to private gender care. Purely speaking from an NHS perspective, essentially the process is your first port of call is your GP. They refer you to a gender identity clinic. Depending on where you are in the country, that would dictate which clinic you go to. You'd then be on a wait list for that clinic, which are measured in years. And if you are fortunate enough to be in one of the areas where there is one of the devolved pilot programs currently running, which are intended ultimately to replace the gender identity clinic model and the medical model, which is currently used, which was established in 1966, before even gay marriage was legalized, so it's a bit outdated, particularly for non-binary gender identities. Then you can transfer onto their waiting list, and their waiting lists are shorter. They have a much more kind of modern approach to gender care. So I'm with a clinic called C Magic, which is for Cheshire and Merseyside. There's one in Manchester called Indigo, and each one of them has its own approach to gender-related care, which is in C Magic's case, it works through your GP. They essentially are your care navigator, and they manage it through your GP. In Indigo's case, they effectively replace your GP. So, and that the reason that they're all different is that the idea is that they see which one works best, and then that's what they will use. But there isn't any plan for implementation on that really, or anything like that. But then if you can't wait, which most of us can't, then you do what Jenni did and what I did, in fact, as well. But Jenni's probably best to explain as well.
It's really, really hard, isn't it? When I went to see my doctor, I was referred to a clinic called Porterbrook, which is the NHS clinic in Sheffield. And I'm still on their waiting list, and I haven't yet had my first appointment. And I know people who have been on that waiting list for far longer than me, 4, 5, 6, even 7 years, and aren't getting anywhere with it. And so there isn't that consistent practice, there isn't that consistent care. And not only has that care been pathologized and medicalized over a number of years, but it's also been turned into a political game as well.
Yeah.
And that makes progress really hard, because there are so many politically vested interests in how that care works, particularly for under 18s in this country. That word that you used, Erica, and Christi as well, gatekeepers, that for me, that's been the issue. It's like, what can I possibly do so that I can avoid all the gatekeepers? And I understand how lucky I am that I could do that. That's rare. Most people are not in a position where they can avoid those gatekeepers. We do not have that model of informed consent in the same way you've described in the state that you live in. And the only way that it could be informed consent is if you pay up your money, you go private. Right, okay, this is who I am. You're going to listen to me and believe me, and then you're going to give me the care that I need. And it's only really in the last 6 months that my NHS doctor has now taken over that care. And that took quite a bit of convincing, again, as Christi described, taking the guidance in and the paperwork in and sitting down and saying, no, this is what it says.
So what does private care mean, right? For us, when I think of private care, I'm like, is that like our version of insurance? Is that, what is private care?
Yeah, it's not insurance. It's not an insurance model. So private care here, well, it can be an insurance model actually, but in the case of gender affirming private care, it's basically companies like Gender GP, and you pay a charge to be seen by them. You pay a monthly fee. They do, they can send you your blood tests, they can send you hormone blockers and things like that. So that was it. That's what I did to begin with.
Yeah, and the main providers within the UK, there aren't many that are actually offering that. The big one is Gender Care in London, and even them, because of the demand, because of the waitlist for the NHS, I contacted them in 2020, and I'm yet to hear back from them. Wow. So even with the private model within the UK, just being able to pay doesn't necessarily mean you can access the care.
Okay, that is wild. So you've been going to Gender GP, right, Jenni? You've accessed hormones and various other types of affirming care, and you have yet to be seen by the NHS in multiple years.
Yeah, I haven't. Yeah, they've not done anything at all. So my diagnosis is through Gender GP. I needed the diagnosis in order to do the whole legal bit, which we can probably talk about at some point.
Yeah, that's coming up soon.
Yeah, but the NHS, no, other than my doctor now prescribing, and the only reason my doctor is now prescribing is because I basically booked a flight, went to Thailand and had gender confirmation surgery and did what I needed to do, and then came back. And then at that point, well, you're going to have to give me HRT now because my body ain't making this stuff on its own.
That's right.
Force their hand. Hey, I have a pussy now. It's time to give me that shot, bitch.
Yeah, exactly.
Exactly.
But
Exactly.
that's, that's no way to run gender affirming
Mm-mm.
healthcare, is it? It's just not.
True.
No.
We do have a few services like that in the US, a pay to play system, if you will. It was Loom one of them,
Yeah,
Vanessa.
there's
I forget.
Loom and is it Harmony?
Maybe.
I can't
Um,
remember.
where it's the same model, Jenny, right? Where you pay a monthly fee and then they give you telehealth appointments typically, right? And you get your hormones and your blood work via them, right? So I think my eldest daughter is trans, and I think that's who she uses because where she is, there's just not a trans clinic nearby.
I know the
Um,
Republicans are going after them too, though, so who knows how long they'll last.
yeah, yeah. So I think, in the US, by and large, people are accessing care via their insurance or their workplace if they have insurance, right? It depends on the type of employment you have, the type of income you have, right? So it can be quite hard for people to afford that care in the US. Like for me, for example, when I go to get my injectable estradiol, it costs me like $10 for a 3 month supply. But if I had to buy that over the counter, it's like 200 US for that.
Hmm. And every state's different too. So, like, I live
Mhm.
in Ohio, and for a long time, it's really hard to get gender affirming surgery here covered by insurance.
Mhm.
There's only,
Mhm.
I have the one insurance company that actually covers it. The others are supposed to cover it by law, but, you know, they're big enough that it's cheaper for them to just fight a lawsuit than it is to actually
Yeah.
do the surgeries. So I was able to get it done, but it's very hard to get the surgeries done in Ohio under insurance. But other states, you can get it done quite easily. There's other states that you can get facial feminization surgery, like Washington State, you can get it done there. I can't get it done in Ohio. So,
Mhm. Yeah, those
Yeah, the
are quite
NHS
easy.
will not cover facial feminization surgery, top surgery. It won't do those, and it does offer bottom surgery, um, in the long term, but only via one method. So there's no kind of
Oh.
choice in that. It's there's only like one game in town for doing that if you're going through the NHS route. So there are limiting factors on the NHS with any surgeries, any gender affirming surgeries. And the other thing with the gatekeeping aspect as well, just to clarify, um, at the point you are seen by a gender identity clinic, and many of us have already taken these steps anyway, um, they would, before they would prescribe you anything, before they would prescribe you blockers, before they would prescribe you hormones, before they would take you seriously, they would say, okay, you're now under our care, go away and live in your preferred
Yeah.
gender for a year, and then we'll revisit this. So there's an expectation that you would have no gender affirming care whatsoever, and then assume the gender you feel you align with, which is an incredibly daunting, horrendous idea.
it's
Which
torture.
almost feels like it's intended. It's like torture. It feels like it's. I'm barely kind of comfortable presenting how I want now, and I'm infinitely happier in my body and in myself than I was. But
Hmm.
I still very much feel like a work in progress, and I'm like a year in. So the
Yeah.
idea of having to do all that prior is, yeah, horrendous.
Mm.
Yeah. Here, that the whole lived experience clause, I think, was done away with for quite a while back. It was very common in the 80s and 90s, and now I think, as of maybe the mid 2000s, they got rid of that here. But you did have to, prior to the most recent version of WPATH, right? You did have to have a sustained experience of dysphoria, right, over a period of time that you had to prove out through therapy, right? So we have different types of gatekeeping, but obviously it's an issue everywhere, right? But and that just brings us back to, why do national governments choose to infringe upon people's bodily autonomy, right? If I can choose to have a nose job without consent, why can't I choose to start the hormones that fit who I am without consent,
Exactly.
right? Or without someone else signing off on it. Okay. All right, so on to our next question. I really would kind of like to touch on the differences in the legal process for you all, right? So, here there's a relatively straightforward process you follow. You do have to pay attention to the legalities in your state, but you also have to pay attention to some laws at the national level as well. So while you can change your national identification, what we call our social security number, relatively easily and select your gender at will and acquire a passport where you do that the same, your ability to update your identification at the state level is totally predicated upon the state that you live in, let alone updating something like your birth certificate. So for us, the process can be quite difficult to suss out because you have the federal level and then the state level that makes that much more difficult. What about for you all?
Well, the one thing I would say that was incredibly easy was the first step, changing your name. Changing your name here, there are a couple of avenues to do it. The most commonly used and the simplest is via deed poll. And essentially what you do is you download a form, which is pre-formatted with particular wording. You put your dead name in particular places. You put your actual name in several other places. And you have two witnesses who've known you for a period of time who don't live with you sign it. And that's it, you're done. So you can then send that off to the DVLA for driving license, the government for passport, your bank, and that is an official document that's absolutely 100% legal and valid, and you can update your name immediately, straight away, now, today, very easily. And apart from the admin aspect of it, which everyone has to do, and then finding, oh, I forgot my student loan, damn it, some other thing you've got to update. Apart from that aspect of it, super easy. Where it comes to be more complicated is updating your gender marker on things like your passport, on your driving license, on your birth certificate. And for that, you would need a gender recognition certificate. And in order to qualify for a gender recognition certificate, you would have needed to live in your gender for, I think it's 2 years, with documentation dating back over that period with your name as it currently is on that documentation to prove that you have essentially lived within your assumed gender for a fixed period of time, and then you can apply for a gender recognition certificate. There's no other kind of medical requirements per se, as far as I'm aware.
But I've just done it, so that they do need your diagnosis.
Yeah,
they need two. They need the diagnosis itself, and then a confirmation letter from your GP.
Yeah, confirmation letter that you are unlikely to detransition, I believe, is like a kind of like, yes, this person has transitioned, and yes, this person intends to live in their gender forever.
Okay. So for you all, it's a process that just takes time, right? Like the legalities of changing your name are relatively straightforward, if not full of administrivia. The rest is documenting lived experience where you can update that gender marker. Is that correct?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. So for us, the process starts with legal name change, right? So changing my name to Erica totally depends on the state that I lived in. So the state that I live in, I fill out a form. I have to go get it. I have to have my someone nearby sign it, like my partner, I believe, and then I have to go to a bank or some other legalized institution and get a stranger to approve that, yes, this form is a legal document now. And then from there, I take it to my local court, my local magistrate, and basically hand them paperwork. A judge takes a look at it, signs off on it, and I got it back in 3 weeks. But in other places, you may actually have to appear in court, right? So, and Vanessa, was that the process that you had?
Yeah, in Ohio, it's down to not just the state, it's down to the county, it's down to the individual judge. Like in my county, the judge is pretty anti-trans. She won't authorize gender marker changes on birth certificates, even though she's supposed to by law. But I had to go to an in-person hearing, and she digs deep into the backgrounds of everybody. She goes way in. It's pretty detailed. I wasn't allowed to change my name until after my bankruptcy was cleared up. But so it depends on the judge. There's a lot of people that have a lot of trouble changing their names in Ohio just because if they have a judge that is, frankly, a Republican, it can be hard. I was able to do it, but I wasn't able to seal my name change, which I wanted to do. So,
Right. Okay. Yeah, and then, so the next step for us is once you have those legal documents, based on how hard your state decides to make it, then you apply for a new social security number with the federal government, right? And that drives everything. Like you got to have a bunch of copies of that legal name order and your social security number. Once you do that, then you can get the passport. Once you have your social security number and your passport done, it really becomes a much easier process from there. It depends on the institution you're going to. And the great thing about those for the US at least is that you can choose the gender that you are without proof, right? So my passport says female, my social security number says female. In the state that I live in, Virginia, my driver's license says that. But if I were living in the state that I'm from, I wouldn't be able to have a driver's license that says that because they require gender confirmation surgery in some places, right? So it can be quite difficult, but yeah, but from then on, it's like, okay, you got to talk to your bank, you got to update your credit cards, you got to update your student loans, you got to update your whatever your car payment is or your house payment, and it, that just becomes a process. And I found that some places made it quite easy and some places made it like really difficult. But I think, large institutions in the US, especially those that run at the national level, really want to help you through this process. It is our local states, the cities that we live in, that choose to get in our way.
Yeah. The other layer of complexity as well, which I'd imagine is probably similar in the US, I'm not sure, is again, because our entire process is based on a medical model from 1966, there wasn't a whole lot of concepts back then of non-binary gender identities. So it doesn't really accommodate them. So if you go to your GP and want to seek feminizing care, and you say, my pronouns are they, them, they would be very, very reluctant to even entertain the idea. Now, for myself, my title is MX, my pronouns are they, she. I definitely kind of fall far, far, far more in the woman category than the kind of androgynous category. The one thing that I'm definitely not is not a man. So the feminizing care is essential and important for that. And but the fact that I can essentially kind of tick all the boxes to fall under the category of a binary trans woman from the NHS perspective does me a massive favor because I get care. I know other people who don't tick those boxes who essentially have to follow a script to even be considered. Because if you went and said, I don't have bottom dysphoria, I don't experience X, Y, or Z, and I tick half the boxes, but not all of them, then it becomes a very difficult thing to even begin the process of transition, really, through the NHS.
Yeah, and everyone has their own experience. It's hard.
Yeah, and the irony of that is that you've got people trying to get the care that they need and then jumping through all those hoops to get it. And so not actually being able to be authentic because you've got to say, well, yeah, I did this when I was 2 and this when I was 5 and I've been feeling like this. I really wanted to be able to, and I couldn't have done this, but I wanted to be able to go to GP, whatever, and just say, I'm 47, I've decided to be a woman. That's it. You don't actually need to know anything else. You don't need to dig any deeper. And I think just listening to everybody speak, there is something that's so exposing about this whole system that we have to expose parts of ourselves to other people's judgment. And that's kind of hard enough anyway. But when the state does the same, and I think when Christi and I were talking on the Discord server last week about this idea of state-sanctioned abuse of a minority, And I really think that's present in so much of our system in the US and the UK, that the state can basically say, we are going to legislate to completely undermine, do away with, clear out an entire proportion of our population because we've decided we don't like them very much. And that then gives the green light, I think, to that rise in abuse. And
it's that stigma that's associated with it, and it needs to go, because like I mean, again, I was talking to Jenny the other day, and we were talking about when I first kind of came out and it actually told people. One of my cousins is trans, and she sent me a card which just said, "Congratulations, really happy for you. You know, good luck on your journey. Here for you every step of the way." And it was really affirming. It felt amazing. And one of the reactions that I got from a lot of people around me who were supportive in principle was, "That's weird. You know, why did she do that? That's a strange thing to do." And it's I think it coming out and finding yourself should be a good thing, and it should be embraced and encouraged, and it should be a positive experience. But we're going through this entire process, and we are second guessing what people are thinking about us. We feel like very self-conscious. We're going into every situation like, what's the vibe? What are you thinking? How do you feel about trans people? What's your perspective? Do you think trans identities are valid? And even in a medical context, that's happening, where we're having to kind of almost second guess ourselves. So we can't, like, we're trying to be authentic and just be transparent and say how it is, but then you say the wrong thing, and it's just writing it down, and you feel judged. You're feeling judged all the time for just being who you are, and it just needs to go.
It's so true. Our identities, right, wherever they fall, are up for judgment in a whole variety of public spheres. Economically, politically, in terms of the job market, and in this country at the moment, massively in terms of education and some of the advice that's coming out to schools. Essentially, potentially, although this is only in the early stages at the moment, and it's basically a kind of survey that you can respond to. But what they're intending is that teachers would have to out questioning children to their parents. I can't think of
dangerous.
And it's so dangerous. I can't think of anything less safe. And I work in education, and I've worked alongside kids of all kinds, kids who are questioning their gender and their sexuality. And this stuff's on the internet now in ways it wasn't when some of us were growing up. But the state, again, is sanctioning that abuse. It's saying we are going to treat these children in a way that is potentially extraordinarily harmful for them. And I think sometimes in the trans community, you hear this idea about people having blood on their hands, but actually that's not far-fetched, and it's not a dramatic statement. There are people who are no longer with us who would be had circumstances politically, economically, educationally been different.
Yes.
Many people.
Yeah. Too many.
Yeah, no, it's quite a problem, right? It goes back to something you said, Christi, about constantly outing ourselves, having to go to legal institutions, medical institutions to out yourself and say, this is who I am, and hoping that it goes well, to your workplace, to your friends, to your family, who are like, wow, that's kind of out of the blue. Well, dude, I'm sorry. I don't tell you about all the trauma going into my life about being forced to be a person I'm not. I don't really talk about that in the workplace, but I would love for you to not be like, well, that's weird.
Yeah.
Right.
There shouldn't be that judgment, and there shouldn't be an expectation of the whole kind of assumed cis and assumed heterosexual until proven otherwise kind of mindset is quite dangerous, because it's not the default. And I was a queer kid, and I was brought up by parents who were great parents and loving parents and lovely people, who had no idea how to raise a queer kid at all.
Right.
And it kind of instills all this fear and anxiety, where representation is so important, and normalizing these processes is so important, and feeling okay to be yourself in whatever space that be, work or social settings or family settings or whatever it is, should be totally normal, because people shouldn't live with all this shame about who they are and feeling guilty for it. I mean, I remember telling one of my friends, it's probably the best reaction I had from anybody when I came out, was one of my friends. I told him I'd known him for like 15 years. I think, okay, so I came out in a letter actually, that I gave him. He read it, and he read it, and he looked at me and went, "Oh, thank God! I thought it was going to be something bad," and it felt so
Yeah.
good, because I was like, because he just thought, he was really worried about me, and the reaction was the idea that like this is actually a good thing. It's like, oh, what are you worried about this for? This is fine. Like was so brilliant, and that should be able to do that in any context, because it shouldn't
Right,
matter.
but I don't think most people get that, right?
No.
We all know people. We've had our negative experiences by being people who are out in public, and while it's amazing to have that one person like, well, that's not a problem, I'm so happy for you. There are people that are not that way, and this is where the blood on our hands starts to, not our hands, but on people's hands starts to show up, right? And it's a really, I don't think this community really gets the gutting. I think our siblings that are queer, gay, bi, pan, or whatever have a sense of that in their own comings out, right? But to have to reveal yourself in such a deep-seated, revealing way is something that most people don't have to experience in their lives, right?
No.
Oh, and I think that the cishet community really misses that. It can be quite a damaging and traumatic process. I remember my coming out, which I did over a period of like 2 months, and involved like 400 people between friends, family, and work associates. Just gutted me, and I had like one kind of lukewarm experience. I had zero bad experiences, but the anxiety of going to the doctor for the first time, or going to my GP the first time, then going to my trans care specialist, who I was like, oh man, I have to prove to him that I'm trans, or coming out to my mom or my brother or my partner's family, or coming out to 200 people at work because I was quite a visible person in my role. That was almost as distressing as the run up to I'm trans and it's time to do something about it.
I can totally resonate with that. I was a schools advisor, and my line manager knew. And one day I was on a Zoom call like this, and the top half of me at that point was dressed male because nobody knew, and the bottom half was doing just what I feel happy doing. And I'd made a cup of coffee and I'd forgotten. So I got up to get this cup of coffee, and So my line manager, she phoned me later on in the day, and she said, I think you just might need to come out. So they scheduled, and this was in the middle of COVID, they scheduled these back-to-back Zoom calls with each one of my colleagues. I was petrified. I needn't have been. They were lovely. But yeah, and you imagine the trauma of that. You're coming out again and again and again and again and again. And exactly as Christi says, it doesn't end. And then it was 240 schools. And I remember the date. Yeah, I remember the date that email was sent. And it was sent centrally. And then watching the inbox for everything popping in. And I was glued to it probably 48 hours straight. And we had maybe 150 emails back, all positive. There were non-negative and most celebratory, actually. Not just, this is okay, but wow, this is wonderful. The reality of the reaction often feels quite different to what you read, I think, in the papers or what you see in the media. I do believe still that on the whole, people want to be decent human beings, I think.
I do too.
Yeah, I really agree with that. In my experience, I have found that when they come face to face with the trans, I'm typically the first trans person they've met and interacted and talked to, right? Whether it's in the workplace or it's at the grocery store or whatever, people are generally okay. and some are quite lovely, and some just ignore me. And I really have only had negative comments online in my experience. Now, I absolutely know trans people in the States that have had negative comments to their face by some of the worst people. I think by and large, people are generally accepting the question. Like, there are some people that we're never going to win over, and I'm not even going to try. I think our problem today lies in the institutionalized discrimination that we all face as trans people, what happens at the institutional level, but also in that accepting but kind of apathetic about it, right?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, it's those people that are like, well, I don't have a problem with you if you don't have a problem with me. That's not the same as
It's the region
actively
beta
affirm you.
paradox.
Yes.
Yeah, it's the region beta paradox where things aren't quite bad enough to do something about it, but they're bad enough to make everybody's lives miserable. So the people that aren't affected by it kind of go, it could be worse. So they don't really do anything about it because they feel like there's other more important issues. But then it becomes quite insidious then, because what starts quite small can undermine, it can grow, and it can undermine, it can embolden transphobes day to day. So we've seen it with comments made by politicians in the media coverage, negativity in the media. We try and kind of rationalize it to ourselves all the time in the UK within the trans community as it's not going to materialize into anything. It's just a few minorities who are vocal minorities who are just spouting very hateful rhetoric. But the reality in day to day is that the people who kind of harbor those ideas kind of feel like it's giving them permission to go out and spread that. And I've in my local town, I have to take down transphobic posters on a fairly regular basis. We have one of our local churches is very transphobic and is quite vocal. Took down Pride posters and things when Pride was on. And these people shouldn't feel like it's okay to publicly discriminate and post, very derogatory, very hurtful, very harmful, very dangerous things in public, in town, brazenly. But they're being kind of almost told it's okay to do this by national media with the coverage that and the way that they're spreading the negative messages,
and by our politicians as well.
Yeah.
And you'll hear this really often. Politicians will say, I'm the voice of the people. There is that sort of almost Trumpian rhetoric, really.
Yeah.
And you're hearing that all the time here as politicians shift ever to the right, because they think that's where their base is. They think that's where the votes are going to be. I have to be optimistic and just go, no, that's not what this country represents. But you don't know.
Yeah. I think that's one of the more alarming things, right? We expect that in countries that are in emerging economies that aren't first world countries. But when you think about the UK and the US, you think, okay, these are two democratic countries that lead the world in humanitarianism and the rights of their people and fighting for democracy across the world. And here we have at home quite a few problems with the rise of nationalism, right? I mean, you called it out, the rise of Trumpism, right? This idea that that othering people now pays. It's a paying industry thanks to news outlets, magazines, the fact that politicians in general need to woo over certain aspects of their constituency. And depending on where you are, there might be more of those people. And the lived reality, I think, for many is that there's what we hear at the political level, there's what we hear on the internet. By and large, it's not as bad. I'm not saying there aren't bad experiences that people have, and there aren't places that are just absolutely terrible. Of course there are. But I think the reality is that most of the population is like, well, it doesn't really affect me.
Yeah.
So I don't have a problem with it. But that also means they don't do anything to push back against it. Right. And right now it's paying. And there's a really interesting study that I cite a lot. Probably this is the third time on this podcast, but I'm going to do it again, which is in periods of national or global crisis. So we just rolled out of COVID. It's still going on, by the way. Affected nations or globally, depending on how large it is. So World War II, World War I, the attacks in America on 9/11. drive a sense of nationalism after that, because we start to pull within, we get conservative, we really protect our borders, we really start to think about, oh, we've got to look out for ourselves because something just major just happened. And it's a well-documented study that shows that in these periods of times, politically, we become far more conservative because we feel like we need to look out for ourselves. And what rises with that is racism, sexism, anti-feminism, like all of those things become really rise up and become a popularized topic, because that nationalism is literally typically led by white cis males who are protecting their territory and protecting the turf. For goodness sakes, in the United States, we're dealing with people worried about the great replacement, where there's not enough white people. This is a topic that's happening within our borders, which is just a wild thing that happens. So I think we're in this state of, it pays for politicians to be this way. The people that are just assholes that see themselves and Trump on the screen are able to be loud because they feel empowered and emboldened by it. Whereas I think the average citizen is, if you ask them, have you actually ever met a trans person? Have you seen one in the bathroom? Their answer is going to be, well, no, I'm just parroting what I'm hearing. But they're not going to say that to you because they finally feel like that quiet voice inside is allowed to come out.
That's why when I was my plan for running for office, my platform, I was not going to platform on trans rights because people don't care about trans rights. I was going to platform on childcare because if I platformed on on trans rights, I wouldn't have gotten elected. People are like, who's this crazy thing?
And I think that's something that's quite reassuring as well, is a lot of the general public now, because it's kind of gone on for a while in the UK, upwards of 6 months, we're seeing a cost of living crisis, a housing crisis. We're still feeling the repercussions of COVID. Unemployment is high. Food bank usage has gone up significantly under the current government. These are the issues that people care about. And now that when they keep hearing this transphobic rhetoric from people in government, particularly focused on trans women, a lot of people are sitting and saying, what you're not actually tackling any of the issues. They're just getting frustrated with the government now and just saying, well, no, we don't care about that. We care about these other things. So there is a general apathy towards it, but they're also now recognizing that this is just a distraction tactic from the actual issues that people care about day to day, and they are getting wise to the kind of wolf whistle politics that's being played out in government and in the national media, and they are actually pushing back against it. And I hope that's reflected in the election when it comes next in the tail end of the year.
The U.S. House had the least productive year in 100 years last year, and they're supposed to, Ohio House was the same way. So it was the least productive since the 50s. What are they doing? They're not representing people.
I mean, this is the thing. They talk about trans women in women's wards in hospitals. But then the NHS statistics come out for it and say, well, we've never had a complaint in the entire history of the NHS against trans women in a women's ward. Never, not once. There's not one example, and you're pushing this as an issue. But within Parliament, there are, like, I couldn't quote the exact numbers, but there are many, many, many sexual harassment complaints against people, politicians who are pushing this rhetoric.
It's all projection.
They are themselves under, exactly. They themselves are under investigation in genuine, legal cases, which will probably go to court at some point. And yet they are pushing a rhetoric that, these people that are other than what your lived experience is, they're the problem, and they should be your focus. But
redirection and projection.
Yeah, distraction politics, right? Politics that is focused on obstruction instead of for the public good. That's the era that we've been in the United States since, I think, Barack Obama's second term, 2012. And it's really led us to where we are today. And I know that quite a few countries around the world have watched this and parroted this, as well as having their own versions, like the rise of dictatorship again. Good Lord. This is what World War II was about, people.
Yeah.
So, okay. One last question, because I know we're coming up on time. We wound up talking about sort of the politics at at stake here, relatively the same, just sort of different lenses, right? But I'm just really curious, in terms of the experience that you have in the UK versus what we have here in good old America. And by the way, America is apostrophe Merica. There's no A there. What do you guys recognize as like, oh, that's kind of an American thing versus how we do? I don't know if there is something like that. I just thought it'd be an interesting question to sort of draw out between the four of us.
I think so. One thing I do think that is fundamentally different between the UK and America is our sense of humor. I think in the UK we are quite self-deprecating, and we are
Yes.
capable of laughing at ourselves in a way that we rarely see in our American counterparts. So I think a prime example of this, although I'm not a fan of the show myself, is the UK and the American versions of The Office. Now, say what you will about the cast and the actual plots, which I'm not, again, I don't really watch. But when you look, if you compare the two, the UK one is it's very self-deprecating. It's quite sad in some ways because the entire cast is kind of very down on themselves and very kind of somber, and we can laugh at like how pathetic we are as individuals. But then when you look at the American one, it's all very outwards facing humor, and it's very kind of pushing things out towards the people and the events, and laughing at things and laughing at events. It's more practical comedy and more,
I look at Red Dwarf as a perfect
Red Dwarf,
example of as self-deprecating because it's the entire show, so.
Yeah, interesting that you call out there what is effectively American exceptionalism, right? This whole thing that, I mean, you know this, Vanessa, that we're brought up with, like, you can be anything.
Yeah.
You're the greatest in the world. And so many of us reflect that, right? Some of us are self-deprecating and can laugh at themselves. I certainly laugh at myself all the time. But it is not something that we do as a nation. Self-reflection is something we do as a people about an event that happened, right? So I definitely that's different. I have always loved British comedy because I've always made fun of myself, and I see myself in British comedy quite a bit. So
same.
There's something, isn't there, in the comedy? But when you watch the shows and it's an American audience versus a UK audience, and there's a sense of just energy in a US audience, and people are they're whooping and they're shouting and they're cheering and all of that. And we're a little bit more reserved, perhaps, in the UK. But I do think there is something we can learn from the US in this regard. And I'm sort of bringing it back to the trans experience here. That I went to town recently, and it was a get-together of trans people, non-binary people. And there was a woman there, and she must have been similar age to me, right at the start of her journey. And it's the first time she'd been out in town as her. So she got dressed up. She looked amazing. She looked fantastic. But she was shaking. She was visibly shaking, and finding it sort of that sense of being accepted and all of that. And a bit like Christi said at the beginning, we go through all these repeated coming outs as we get to know ourselves, as we get to grow into our new bodies, our new identities. And so each one of those can either be something difficult, something to hide, something maybe to be ashamed of because we're not there yet, wherever there is, or it can be something to be celebrated. And I often like that idea of just that getting up and clapping and celebrating and whooping and cheering and going, yeah, this is great. This is me now. We lack that positivity, I think, in the UK. I think we need more of it. So we need to do that for each other.
Yeah, I'd agree. Yeah. Celebrating each other and our achievements and our little wins. And it is a national kind of psyche thing where we do tend to focus on the negative, and we tend to kind of try and make something humorous out of the negative. But really, it would be, I think, better in many cases to celebrate the positive and really kind of exemplify it and focus on that.
I love that, and that is something that I do aggressively and relentlessly. if you spend time with me, you're gonna have a good time, right? I'm really outgoing, and I back to what you said, Jenny. When I see that person in the crowd, but I'm like, oh, this is their first time out. I will go and stand with them and just hold their hand or hold their arm and be like, hey, you're doing great.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Love you so much. And I love showing up for people in that way. I will celebrate myself, right? But I really love to celebrate others a lot, because I think people really need that sort of shot in the arm from them, right?
We need those
And
cheerleaders really to get us through.
I know cheerleading is quite a culture here in the United States, right? But I think also, Christy, you demonstrated very well. Here's the difference between how UK and American people. That's the UK Americans, right? That's everything. And I think everybody needs to grab onto that a bit more. Granted, there's different cultures around the world, different ideas how you should express. I love that the idea that whatever your culture is and whatever your nation is, you go out of the way to find joy in yourself and share in other people's joys. I think particularly for trans people, particularly for marginalized communities, that joy is resistance. That is showing that who I am is not only okay, it is the best part of me.
Yay.
Little tiny clap.
Yeah. Okay, well, I think we are right at time here. Jenny and Christy, do you have anything that you want to plug? You want to plug your socials, anything like that?
If I was like an active, socially type person, I'm not. I'm completely rubbish, but I am on Instagram. I don't even know what my Instagram tag is. I'm looking it up on my phone now.
Wait,
Right.
I can find it.
Oh, okay. Thank you. I think it's Jenn, JENNSL50, I think.
That's easy.
Is that right?
Where is it?
I'm pretty sure.
I am Chris_TMI on Instagram. That is, if I remember correctly, I think it's a Chris with a K. No, it is CHRIS_TMI on Instagram, and that's my only social. That's the only place you'll find me anywhere, because I'm not on Facebook because it's horrendous, and
It is.
I'm not on X because it's horrendous. And yeah, just yeah, you can add me on Instagram if you like. I mostly post selfies. I'm very vain and very terrible
That's what we all
for
do.
that. But
Yeah, just DM me those tags, so I'll plug them on. But yeah, thank you both very much for joining us. This was wonderful and informative, and it's both nice to know and horrible to know that we're not alone here in the U.S. with horrible governments working against us. So
We're in the same boat.
yeah. Do you have any parting words to our siblings in the UK of hope?
You too.
I would say, if I was going to give any kind of like words to anyone, I would just say, believe in yourself, reach out to the trans community. It's the best thing I ever did. It is an amazing community that embraces one another and really lifts each other up. And, you know, we often kind of overlook the human aspects of LGBT community with all these labels, and we kind of focus very much on these labels and what it means in society. But there's people behind that label, which are an amazing, fantastic, universally loving and caring group of people who give you understanding without any judgment and support and found family that I honestly don't know where I would be without, because they are just the best people I've ever met. So reach out to the community, embrace it, and you can do it. Believe in yourself. And that's pretty much it.
Well said.
Yay. Perfect.
Yeah. Hey, just a message in general. If you are new to this path, if your egg is cracking watching us, find your community, reach out, find on a Discord server or in your local community. I know it can be quite scary, but in general, trans people are really welcoming and warm and happy to meet you and see you. Quite frequently, I see trans people out in public, and we play this game of like, I see you and you see me, but we're afraid to talk to each other. And it's weird. Just come up and say hello.
Don't do it alone. Don't do it alone.
Don't do it alone. Yeah.
Yeah, it's hard. It's scary.
You don't have
but
to do it
you gotta
alone. You
No.
might feel like you have to. You might feel like
Yeah.
it's only you that feels like this.
You don't.
But no,
Nobody else feels like this. It's not true.
guarantee you, everything that you're feeling, many other people are feeling too. So,
Yeah.
Yeah. Four people on this podcast who did not grow up with each other have very similar stories and experiences. You were not alone.
Exactly. Okay. Thank you again for joining us on Transcending Humanity. Don't know what next episode will be. I'm working on something kind of special. Actually, I'm working on two special little projects. So we'll see. But don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and subscribe to that Patreon, please. Please. So yeah, have a great one. Thank you again for listening, watching, however you find our show. Bye.
Bye. Good job, everybody.